2.
Welcome to Boss Mode Radio. You're with Donna Preety on The Conscious Creator, the show that's all about helping you get into the right mindset to expand your business. And today we have a very special guest on our show. Dr John Demartini is one of the world's leading authorities in human behaviour and personal development. He is the founder of the Demartini Institute. He's a researcher, a writer of over 40 books in 29 languages, and a teacher who travels the world 365 days a year to share his wealth of knowledge. He has also been one of my greatest mentors, and applying the work that he teaches has been one of the most significant things I've ever done to transform my life. I'm truly grateful that you're here to speak with us today. And Dr. John Demartini, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, one of the topics that Boss Mode listeners have requested that we talk about is the imposter syndrome, which for our listeners that are still a little hazy as to what that is, it's defined as any time that you feel like a fraud, any time that a person feels like they're not deserving of their achievements, and also actually going out of their way to hide this and make sure that no one finds out. And speaking to many of our listeners over the past few weeks, this is something that plagues many business owners from time to time. And today we'd love to talk about how this affects people within their business. So, John, could you please tell us what's happening to a person when they are perceiving themselves as an imposter or as a fraud?
Well, I'll put a scenario together for a second. Every human being has an oscillating feelings about themselves. They sometimes exaggerate themselves with pride. They sometimes minimize themselves with shame. They have a superiority complex sometimes or an inferiority complex. And then occasionally get in the center where they're really authentic. Now, we have these two based on our perceptions of what's going on around us and how we're responding to our perceptions of ourselves and the world around us, the people. In other words, if somebody challenges us and what we value most, we tend to go up into a narcissistic pride side. If somebody supports us, we tend to humble ourselves into sort of an altruistic shame side. When we are in a state where somebody's challenging us and we've been really wounded by that challenge, maybe criticized pretty strongly, if it goes to such a degree that we feel ashamed of ourselves because we've now subordinated to their opinion of us, that wound can make us preemptively strike and prevent us from having that happen again by beating ourselves up or putting ourselves down to prevent them from doing it as a preemptive strike. And we'll sometimes actually have a drive inside us to do something extraordinary, but inside we'll put on a facade that we don't, it was all luck, it was, I didn't do it. And they'll actually display this idea of putting themselves down to prevent somebody else from getting to them. So this is a not uncommon process, and sometimes we do it consciously, and sometimes unconsciously. But the fraud syndrome or the fraud imposter syndrome or whatever is common. It's not really a syndrome. It's not. I don't like to call it a label because I think the reality is that everybody has had a moment where we've played this role out as a prevention. If I walked in a room and somebody said, "Oh, Dr. Demartini, you're really amazing," and they started praising me, I would put myself down to get back in equilibrium because my bullshit meter would automatically go off if they exaggerated me. At the same time, if they were putting me up like that, and I exaggerated myself and I said, well, what you say is true and I'm even greater than that, they'd immediately cut me down. They'd put me down to get me back in equilibrium. So we have this built-in thermostat of who we are, and we'll use that strategically, conscious or unconscious, as a strategy to preemptively strike to prevent ourselves from being wounded. And so that's what many times we're actually doing with the fraud syndrome.
Okay, and with the prevalence of social media, this is often one thing that our listeners tell me, that they scroll through Facebook, they see what everyone else is doing. How does presenting our best side and witnessing other people always just only presenting their best side on social media, how do you think that this also impacts on people's experience?
Well, the person who's putting on the facade of one side, because it is a facade, it's a persona that the mask they're wearing, they won't get away with one side. If I went up to somebody and I said to you, you're always nice, you're never mean. You're always kind, you're never cruel. You're always sweet, you're never bitter. You're always positive, you're never negative. You're always peaceful, you're never wrathful. You're always generous, you're never stingy. Would you believe me? They would say, not really. You're always mean. You're never nice. You're always cruel. You're never kind. You're always negative. You're never positive. You're always stingy. You're never generous. You're always critical without praising. Would you believe me? And they go, no. I said, sometimes you're nice. Sometimes you're mean. Sometimes you're kind. Sometimes you're cruel. Sometimes you're positive. Sometimes you're negative. And they would immediately believe me. Their bullshit meter would let them know that intuitively that they're both. So anytime somebody's putting on a facade, there's inside them, a part of them knows it's an imposter. They know that they have that fraud because they know that they're displaying that part to protect themselves.
Yeah. Okay. So do we need to turn social media off so that we're not bombarded by all of this, or is there something else that people can do?
Well, I think social media is a neutral medium. It's simply technology, and how human beings use it is what matters. So I don't want to label social media as good or bad. I think that's not wise, because it has tremendous use if you use it wisely. But you'd have to understand that if you try to put on a facade of one side, you eventually get humbled. Anytime you go above equilibrium and go and puff yourself up, you're going to attract within yourself as a feedback, intuitively, the other side. And also around you, it's like the tall poppy syndrome. You're automatically going to have people put you down. Because everything that's going on in our life is trying to get us authentic. And if we minimize ourselves, people build us up. A lot of people put themselves down in the fraud syndrome as a way of getting people to praise them. They'll say, I'm a failure, I can't do things, no matter what I do, I keep failing, I'm not really that great. And people will praise them, and it's an unconscious or conscious motive to get the praise, because they can get addicted to the praise because of the previous wounds. So nature has a way of bringing people into authenticity. And even in social media, if you go too far and puff yourself up and put on a facade, the blogs will start nailing you to get you back in equilibrium. And then they'll go back and forth until you finally find the center.
Yeah. Okay. And so you said something interesting there, that it's an attempt to get us to become more authentic, and that people are often addicted to the praise. So if we're aware of that, we actually know what's going on. What can people do to become more authentic so that they're not subjecting themselves to these massive swings and oscillations of feeling really terrible about themselves and then really great about themselves and looking for that external praise? What could the listeners do to help them overcome that?
I always say that the addiction to a monopole, the addiction to a positive pole only in life, will create a bipolar condition, because you'll be vacillating between pride and shame all the time, manic and depressive. The wisest thing that I've been able to find to do, as I teach in my breakthrough experience, is to show them that they're both going on at the same time. So what I do in the breakthrough experience many times is I ask them to go to a moment when you're actually perceiving yourself with the most pride, the most excited, elated, puffed up state. Okay, where are you? What are you doing? When is this? And get them really narrowed down to it and go to that moment. And then when they get really present in that moment, I said, now what are you beating yourself up about? What are you ashamed about? And they go, oh, wow. And they're really proud about what they're doing at work. They're beating themselves up usually in relationship issues or health issues. And if they're really proud in a relationship issue, they may be beating themselves up because they're not producing income, or they're overspending, or something else. There's an androgyny sitting in the content of what they're proud and shamed of. But actually at that moment, they're conscious of one and unconscious of the other. And so by bringing them into consciousness, full consciousness of both sides, it tends to neutralize and harmonize and lets them realize that they're in the center. Their elevated self-esteem and their depressed self-esteem together combined make up the true self-worth. And finding that center between those two polarities and integrating them at the same time trains the brain to go into the executive center where they have self-governance, so they don't allow themselves such high volatility. But as long as they're in the amygdala region of the brain and they keep being addicted to just the praise and just the pride and just the puff, they're going to have to beat themselves up. Nobody will ever beat themselves up unless they're building themselves up. And the addiction to building themselves up and seeking praise will guarantee that they're going to beat themselves up publicly.
Okay, yeah, that's great. And I think that's also really relevant. We have a lot of working mothers that listen to us that are trying to run businesses as well as care for their families. And a common thing that we do see is that the mums feel they feel either puffed up at work, and then they're beating themselves up about not running the family to their best ability. And then often on the flip side, they feel like an imposter at work, but they're absolutely nailing it at home.
Exactly.
So this gives us a strategy to actually come to the centre so that you can be amazing at both.
That's it. Well, every human being has a set of priorities, a set of values that they live their life by. And whenever they're living by priority and living congruently with what they value most, they have the highest probability of objective feelings. That means they're more balanced in their orientation and less polarized. And this syndrome, this so-called imposter syndrome, for instance, is less likely to be evident when you're in a state of doing what's inspiring to you and living objectively. But the second you feel that you're injecting the values of other people, subordinating to everybody else's, scattering yourself with lower priority activities, and not living congruent, you automatically become more polarized in the amygdala region of the brain, hindbrain, not the forebrain, and you automatically start to have the addiction to pride and the protection mechanism going on. And that's where the imposter syndrome emerges.
Great. Thank you so much. Now, Boss Mode listeners, we're just going to go to a short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to John a little bit more about values, because I think that this is a great opportunity to ask John how we can get to know our values a little bit better and use this to clear this dreaded imposter syndrome. Welcome back to Boss Mode Radio, and you're listening to The Conscious Creator with Donna Preedy. And today we have a very special guest with us, Dr. John Demartini, who's been helping us pull apart the imposter syndrome so that we can reach our full potential and stop comparing ourselves to others. John, you mentioned in the first part of the interview that about values and how knowing your values and living authentically. But what does this actually mean for somebody that's never heard about values, doesn't really know what that is? How does knowing your values apply to helping you clear the imposter syndrome?
Well, every human being, regardless of gender or age or culture, lives by a set of priorities, a set of values, things that are most important to least important in their life. Each individual has a unique set. No two people have the same perceptions and values. They're like fingerprints. Whatever these values are, they determine how they perceive the world, how they act upon the world, make the decisions in the world. And so your hierarchy of values or set of values determines really your destiny, how you react to the world. Yeah. This set of values is evolving. So when you're a child, it's different than as you're a teenager, etc. But it is an evolving structure, gradually or maybe punctually. Whatever this set of values is, because it's determining our perceptions, we filter our reality accordingly. A mother whose highest value is children will walk in a mall and see children's items, but an entrepreneur walking in the mall will see a completely different set of items. We filter our reality according to what we value, and we filter our actions according to it in all our decisions. So the hierarchy of one's values dictates one's destiny, as I said. Knowing one's values is important, because when you live according to your highest values, you have the greatest fulfillment, and they are intrinsic, and you are spontaneously inspired from within to fulfill them and act. So anytime you set a goal that's aligned with your highest values, you have the highest probability of achieving it. But anytime you set a goal that is according to a lower value, which is usually coming from outside sources, it's an extrinsic value, you'll need motivation and incentives and reminders to get yourself to do it. An example is a young boy who's 12 years old who loves his video games. Nobody has to remind him to do his video games, but they may have to remind him to do his chores and his homework, because he has an intrinsic value on the video games and an extrinsic value on the homework. So you have to motivate him and push him uphill to do the homework, but he just spontaneously does the other. So anytime a person sets a goal that's congruent with the highest values, they spontaneously achieve, and they don't stop. They're willing to embrace pain and pleasure in the pursuit of this. But if it's something low in their values, they'll do it if it's pleasurable, but they'll give up if it's painful. So in the workplace, the highest thing a person can do is stick to priorities, to stick to what's really valuable to them, and to see how whatever they're doing in their career is helping them fulfill that. So they're more engaged, more productive, more inspired, and intrinsically wanting to do the work that's essential. Now, with the imposter syndrome, anytime somebody tries to live in their lower values because they're comparing themselves to others that they envy, that they admire, that they subordinate to, and they're living in their shadows, and they're trying to be somebody they're not. They're more vulnerable to the imposter syndrome because they're giving people the power to determine their destiny instead of themselves. And we give that as an authority. We make them the author of our life by putting them on a pedestal. We're not here to put people in pedestals or pits. We're here to put them in a heart and have equity between ourselves and them, to have a fulfilling relationship. So anytime we minimize ourselves to other people and exaggerate them and put them on a pedestal and inject their values into our life and try to be somebody we're not, we're now going to be fearing rejection, and we're going to remind ourselves of the past wounds of rejection, and we're going to use the imposter syndrome to prevent ourselves from those rejections. And that's a way of preemptively striking and preventing those responses.
Okay, that leads on to the next question, which I think you've just answered, and that was, what are the benefits of or the purpose of the imposter syndrome? And based on that, would you say that it is really to get us back into that centered place?
Well, it's an attempt to prevent yourself from being wounded again.
Yeah.
It's also a mechanism that's going to force you back into your authentic self.
Yeah.
If somebody came up to you and said, "Oh, you're amazing," and they just puffed you up above what you believe, you immediately beat yourself up inside and start speaking up about, "Well, that's not true. Talk to my girlfriend or my boyfriend, and they'll tell you the other side." You automatically bring yourself back into equilibrium because you know it's bull. So the same thing, if they put you down below, there's the opposite of that imposter syndrome. If they put you down below, you'll tend to say no. You'll defend yourself and say, no, that's not me. That's not true either. So anytime somebody puffs you up or puts you down and deflates you more than what you believe, you'll create those two reactions to get you back in center. So you have a homeostatic mechanism in the brain to try to get you back to authenticity. The imposter syndrome is an attempt to do that, but to prevent the wounds of the past and to push yourself, because the imposter syndrome also has a benefit side. Most of the people that do the imposter syndrome are highly driven. Some of them are high achievers. There's a lot of celebrities out there that have this, and we all have it at different moments. So it's not really a psychological disorder. It's just part of life. Yeah. But at the same time, it's something that we use sometimes as a strategy. I really believe that it's simply a strategy that's either used consciously or unconsciously, and many people use it consciously. I've certainly used it in my own seminars, dealing with people that are gullibly infatuated with me in the seminars. I specifically do that to calm down the infatuation, because otherwise they're setting up a fantasy about myself and minimizing themselves, which is undermining their growth.
And I've actually seen you do that.
so I've used that purposely.
No, and so do you have, John? Do you have a specific example of either a time when you have done it yourself, or a time where you've been with someone else and you've witnessed them do it? Do you have a story that you could share with us?
Yeah, because in many cases, it's not just one. This happens weekly. Many people, they'll create a fantasy. I've been in a situation where I went in to do a TV show one time, and the people were all enamored, and they all thought, "Oh, he's amazing," and I'm just thinking, this is ridiculous. I'm just a guy who I just happen to love researching and writing and traveling and teaching, and I just do it, and it's nothing more. But sometimes people will put an exaggerated puff up on somebody, and I'll go in there and I'll really negate, I'll reverse that and negate that and really humble the process and show them and emphasize the things that I've done and that have actually popped that fantasy to get them grounded, because otherwise they're going to beat themselves up, compare themselves to a fantasy that's not me. And eventually, if they hold on to that fantasy, I'm not going to live up to that fantasy. So that's a burden to me, and it's a burden to them. So why would I want to do that? I can't live up to a fantasy. I'm not a hero without having a villain side to me. And if they make me a hero and they get addicted to that, they're going to minimize themselves, thinking that they have lacking something. And so that's not helping them. It's not helping me. So I will purposely go in there and just get centered. And it frees me up to be able to be myself and not have to put on a facade.
Yeah. Okay. Great. And so could I also just ask you, what impact is this having on, I know that, as you said, this is something that all of us will experience, but what impact is this having on our productivity and our ability to actually maximise our potential, mainly within our businesses?
I don't want to say it's a bad thing, because so many people will say, well, we got to get rid of this thing. Some of the highest achievers use this. I don't want to give too many names, but there are people in the Hollywood scene that are very much involved in this. And there's people in sports. I've seen it in sports. High-performing sports people very commonly use this to prevent themselves from the attacks. And so it can be productive because a lot of people are highly driven. They're perfectionists. They drive themselves. They push themselves beyond normal limits to compensate for it, to prevent these things from the previous wounds being reactivated. But at the same time, they can set up sometimes such high and realistic expectations that they feel defeated. So there's a fine line. It can be used very productively, or it could also go to just a little too much, and then they end up feeling defeated. They want to give up. So finding that, using it actually within a certain tolerance zone is really actually productive. It doesn't have to have a bad connotation to it. But I think we all use it to some degree.
Yeah, and that's interesting. I was fortunate enough to attend the Breakthrough experience over the weekend, and I remember one of the things that you said that I took note of was that when we're feeling elated, we'll set goals that are unrealistically high in a really short amount of time. But on the flip side, when we're feeling deflated, we'll tend to set goals that are not big enough for us. So what can we do to set goals that are congruent so that we're minimising our chance of actually unconsciously experiencing this? I can see that there are benefits to consciously using it to our advantage, but what can we do when we're setting our goals within our business and also within our personal lives so that we're less likely to be comparing ourselves to the outside world?
Well, what I do in another leadership program that I do, I explain to people that it's not an unwise thing to write down the goal that you have. Write down the date you set it, the date you intend to achieve it, and then the date you actually achieved it. If you find out that the date you set it, and you set the date to complete it was, say, 3 months, and you found out that you achieved it in 4 months, then you're probably on the manic side and exaggerated, puffed up side when you set it with unrealistic expectations. And of course, as a result of it, you probably beat yourself up the last 30 days thinking, I should have done this, I could have done this, and everything else, because that persona that set that goal wasn't really you. It wasn't thought through, which is a sign it's not in the executive center, which is occurring when you're really congruent. But if all of a sudden you set a goal and it is done in 2 months, not 3 months, you feel more exhilarated and you feel up. So anytime you set a goal that's too big, you tend to set yourself up for failure, perceptions. Anytime you set a goal that's too small, you tend to set yourself up for success, perceptions. And both of those are feedback, homeostats, to try to get you to set real goals in real times where you're not feeling puffed up or down, you're just feeling grateful. A sign you've set a goal that's congruent is you feel grateful, you feel it's impossible not to fulfill, your executive center comes online and you see an inspired vision of how it can be done, and you achieve it in the time that you set it out.
John, thank you so much. And we're just going to go to a short break. You're on Boss Mode Radio listening to The Conscious Creator. Welcome back to Boss Mode Radio. You're tuned into The Conscious Creator with Donna Preety, and today we're talking to Dr. John Demartini about the imposter syndrome. And John, one of our listeners has emailed us in this morning requesting an answer to a question that they've been pondering for a while, and that is, how do you overcome the imposter syndrome when you feel like you're an imposter or a fake, but logically you know that you're not, yet you still freeze and hesitate to communicate your professional knowledge, either in person or, for example, on online forums, and find yourself standing in the shadows watching instead of actually contributing?
Okay. Anytime we compare ourselves to others, instead of comparing our own actions to our own dreams, we're going to potentially, if we put people up on pedestals, put ourselves in the pit. And we'll tend to withdraw and introvert instead of come out and shine. We'll shrink, not shine. So there's a number of things you can do. Don't participate in something you don't feel certain about. Start with what you know and let what you know grow. That's the wisest thing. Stick to the things that you have your core competence on and pursue that, because that's where you have the most stability and the most confidence in your presentation. The second thing is to identify in people around you that you're minimizing yourself to. What specific traits or actions or inactions are these people doing that you perceive that are greater than you, that you're too humble to admit that you have inside yourself? And find out and look inside and do a self-inspection or introspection. Find out where and when you display and demonstrate these same traits. And if you can identify where, or when you identify where and when you've displayed them, to the same degree as you see in them, in your own form, not their form, you'll immediately not be intimidated by them, and you'll feel that it's an equal, and you'll speak up. Public speaking, many people have a fear of public speaking, more than fear of death, they say. In the process of doing it, when we've analyzed what public speaking is, the fear of it, it's simply the fear of speaking in front of somebody that you think has more knowledge than you in the field that you're speaking in. If you're out and speaking to a kindergarten class about your own life, you don't have a fear of speaking. But if you feel you're going to do a presentation on chemistry and you have all the Nobel Prize winners in front of you that you're about to speak on chemistry, and this is your first week in chemistry class, you're going to feel a fear of public speaking probably. But if you can identify whatever you see in them inside yourself, because the only reason we admire people is that we're too humble to admit what we see in them inside us. But in fact, we have it. That's why we admire it. But we're too humble to admit it. If we go in there and identify where it is to the same degree and level the playing fields, we'll participate as an equal in conversation and have dialogue, not alternating monologues or minimizations. So find out what you see in others inside you that you're admiring, and you'll wake up that and not be sitting in that imposter feeling. But also stick to what you know. Don't exaggerate what you know. You'll get humbled. Just go and stick to what you know and say, I don't know that. Yeah. I professionally speak pretty well every single day. And people ask me a question, and when I don't know, I just don't know. I just say, I don't know that. And they go, oh, okay. And there's not an expectation. I said, but let me find out. Let me write that down. Let me get back to you and give me your email, and I'll do what I can to research this, and I'll share with what then I learn. But if you think that you have to know it because you're afraid of being rejected or something or feeling stupid or something, you'll exaggerate what you know, put yourself on the edge, and then have to use the imposter syndrome. Just stick to what you know and humble yourself that way. Because people that set grandiose goals, infantile megalomanias, as we say, to compensate for their shrunken perceptions of themselves, will put themselves and eventually get trapped, only to get them back in their authentic self.
Yeah, that's great advice for everyone. And I think a lot of people sometimes do have the belief within themselves that they need to know everything on their topic. And listeners, give yourself permission. It's okay sometimes to say, if you don't know it, hey, I don't know, but I'll get back to you. Let me find the answer out. So that's great advice. And we had another listener who messaged us this morning and asked, what about when you can see this in someone else? You know, maybe someone within your family that's also going through this. Is there a way that you can help them approach this so that they can actually grow into their full potential rather than sort of shrinking and remaining stuck?
Well, I tell people in the breakthrough experience that I don't pay much attention to the personas that people wear. You know, many times people will put on a facade, but I'm interested in their heart. If I don't feel their heart, I know that there's a persona that's mapping. So I basically go in there and not pay attention really to one side and know that whatever they have is one side. The other side's hidden. If one's conscious and displayed, the one's hiding. So I look and I try to help them point out. I have people come up to me and say, I keep beating myself up. I keep just sabotaging. What am I doing wrong? I just keep beating myself up. And I ask them, okay, go to that moment you beat yourself up. You there? Okay. Where are you building yourself up? And they kind of look at me for a second. And they go, whoa. Yeah, I'm puffed up over here. I said, as long as you're addicted to puffing yourself up, you have to beat yourself up in order to get yourself back into center. And they go, say that again. I said, every time you get addicted to building yourself up and get addicted to the pride and wanting praise, the addiction to that, you're going to force yourself to beat yourself up to keep yourself centered. Your brain has a homeostat to try to get you centered. So anytime you get addicted to one side, the other side's going to smack you. And that is part of the imposter syndrome, because it's letting you know that you're exaggerating yourself, and so you have to minimize yourself to get you back in the center. You're trying to homeostate yourself. It's exactly just like if you have a high blood sugar and it goes up, you have mechanisms in the brain with homeostats to try to bring it back down, or if it goes low, it tries to get back up. There's chemistries for that.
Okay, so if someone that you care about then is going through it, instead of trying to pump them up, you'd probably be best to agree with them.
Well, just say to them, I said, I see you're beating yourself up.
Yeah.
At this moment, while you're beating yourself up, close your eyes. Where are you building yourself up? Make them aware of both sides at the same time.
Yeah.
Anytime you assist people in seeing both sides, the story, the racket, the psychological game that they play with themselves calms down.
Yeah.
And the second they set goals that are congruent, that are really meaningful to them, that are very inspiring to them. Because every symptom that goes on in psychology or physiology is a feedback to try to get us to live authentically according to what we value most, and to live by what the ancient Greeks call the telos, the chief aim in life, as Napoleon Hill said. And if we're not doing that, we're automatically creating symptomatology to give us feedback, to get us back there. So help them see both sides. That's what I tell them. And also help them prioritize their life, what's really important to them. Because if they're sitting there wallowing in what other people think, they're not on a mission of doing and making the difference. You can't make a difference except when you're authentic, because that's where you're most unique.
Yeah, that's so true. And interesting what you've said there about knowing your values and setting goals around that. And I know my experience when I've worked with clients is certainly what I've discovered is often when people are experiencing this, they have set goals around what they think they should be achieving. They're not setting goals that are congruent with their values, or perhaps their values have shifted, but they're still trying to achieve the same goals that they set before the values shifted. So what can our listeners do in a practical sense to really get to know what their values are and then start setting goals and building their life around that? Because that seems to be the key, doesn't it?
Yes, it's very important. That's why I think every seminar I've ever presented, I don't leave out values. They're the cornerstone. Well, if I just went up to somebody and asked them, what are your values? Most cases, 99% of the people will say social idealisms. They'll tell you what their mother, their father, their preacher, their teacher, or their peer pressure of some convention, tradition, or mores will impose in their life and trying to say what they think it should be. And they'll even say an imperative language by saying, well, I want to be honest, I want to be trustworthy, I want to be this, and I want to be peaceful, and they're kind of idealisms. And I say, okay, now that the bullshit's out there, now let's get to the truth. What does your life demonstrate? What do you do every single day that nobody has to remind you do, that you spontaneously do? And how do you really live your life? So I found that I'm not interested in just asking what they do because they'll give me the facade. I'm interested in what their life demonstrates. How do they fill their space? Things that are really valuable, you keep around you. Things that are not valuable, you discard. How do you spend your time? You make time for things that are really valuable. You run out of time for things that aren't. What energizes you? You have more energy when you're doing something that's high in your values. It drains you if you don't. What is it you spend your money on? You find money and make money and spend money on things that are valuable to you. You don't want to spend money on things that don't. Where are you most organized? You're organized and disciplined and ordered in the area of your highest values, and you got chaos in the area of lowest. Where are you most disciplined and reliable? What is it we can always rely on you to do? My case, research and teach. I'm not reliable when it comes to cooking and driving. I haven't cooked since I was 24 and haven't driven in 27 and a half years. But you can rely on me to be researching and teaching, as I did this morning and I'll do all day. And then the next one is, what do you think about how you want your life that shows evidence of coming true? What do you visualize about how you want your life that shows evidence of coming true? What are you affirming and talking to yourself internally in dialogue about how you want your life that shows evidence coming true? What are you conversing with other people about most and constantly want to bring the conversation to? What inspires you and what's common to the people who inspire you? What is it the most consistent, persistent goals that you've had that are coming true? And what do you absolutely love learning about and you spontaneously want to read about it? And you go to that area of the bookstore or online, you go and watch those videos. What do you want to learn? If you take those 13 value determinants and answer, say 3 answers for each, and look at what's the most common answers that repeat, your life is demonstrating not your idealism that you're hoping to live by. And this is very crucial, to set goals that match that, because that's where you'll achieve.
Yeah, that's great. And I've also noticed that checking out what social media delivers you. Social media knows your values. I notice that when I'm really interested and invested and inspired by my business, all of a sudden business articles will start popping up. But when my focus shifts and I start focusing on my son, all of a sudden parenting articles. So social media isn't all bad. It does serve a purpose for us as well. And so, John, once we know our values, how often, what can we do to make sure that we're then setting goals? How can we actually stay on track and make sure, because as you said, values do shift. Our values do shift from time to time. So what should we be doing? How often should we be revising our goals and our values?
Well, I think it's wise to go and do a value determination. On my website, drdemartini.com, there's a complimentary value determination process. It would take them about 30 minutes to do. I tell people do that about every quarter, about every 3 months, do it, because there could be shifts in that time. And then make sure that you refine the goals that you have. Either go and set goals that match your highest values or change the values to match your goals. You have 2 options. But if you're not setting goals and doing what you love every day, you're going to end up having a Monday morning blues, a Wednesday hump days, a thank God it's Fridays, and a week friggin' end. And you're going to have a schizophrenic life because you're going to go work doing something you do to make money, and then you're going to have to escape it to go spend your money. Why not do what you love and get paid for it? That's what I teach people in the Breakthrough Experience, and I'm absolutely certain that's doable for people.
Yeah, that's great advice. And Boss Mode listeners, we're just going to a short break, and we will see you soon. Welcome back to Boss Mode Radio. You're listening to The Conscious Creator with Donna Preety, and today we have special guest Dr. John Demartini with us. And we're talking about the imposter syndrome. Now, let's get raw, okay? Let's get raw and find out what this actually looks like, because you've shared so much knowledge with us, and I know that this will help our listeners. But we want the gritty side. We want to know what this actually looks like, because one of the things that I discovered when I first started talking about the imposter syndrome was that I remember discussing this with someone, and she said, I thought this was only me. She said, I only just found out about this a week ago, but she said, I thought I was the only one suffering from this. And I know that it certainly prevented her from taking steps and inroads within her business. Once she knew that other people also had this, it was almost like she felt a sense of connection, and it empowered her to take steps forward. So have you got a raw story with someone that really was beating themselves up, and what that looked like and how they overcame that?
Yeah, there was a lovely lady that came in for an interview in my company quite a number of years back, over 30 years ago, who was did a lovely presentation. And I felt that let's give this lady a chance at this, because I think she looks like she'd be a good hard worker. Well, she was working, literally, she came in and she would start at about 8 in the morning, and she would not leave till 7, 8 at night. She just stayed, and she was overworking, pushing herself. She'd be really harsh on herself if she made an error. She was worried about what people were thinking, and she was putting herself down. And all the people around her you could see that they were trying to support her and trying to build her up. And the more she did it, the more she was putting herself down, and she was thinking she was not good enough. So I finally pulled her off to the side. I said, you've got high expectations. You're driven in pushing yourself. You're over pushing yourself, and you're beating yourself up constantly. And then this is before I really understood this, but I watched this now, looking back at it. And I said, and I noticed this. I notice that you're doing this, and everybody is supporting you around you, and they're unifying to try to encourage you. I said, did you have a situation in your life where you had somehow got punished or hurt or ridiculed or whatever for your performance? And she started crying. And I said, what happened here? And she said, yeah, one of the first times I ever went to work when I was 17 years old, I got crushed and I got fired. And I guess I was so wounded by that, so hurt by that. I wanted to make sure that I did not ever have that situation again. And I thought I was doing a great job, and I was really kind of cocky and proud of what I was doing, thinking I was doing a better job than everybody else. And I got slammed, and I just couldn't believe it. And I said, okay, so what you do now is you minimize yourself and do extra hard work to compensate for it, to prevent that from happening. And you beat yourself up before other people can do it. She started crying again. And I said, so this is your strategy? She goes, I guess it is. I didn't really pay much attention to it, but now that I think about it, that's what I'm doing. I make sure that people are praising me, so I go out of my way to make sure I do it by putting myself down and pretending like I'm beating myself up. I said, you have another side, don't you? You're also proud of what you do. And now she's got this gleam on her face. I said, you know what you're doing. And she smiled, she says, yes. I said, you found a strategy, didn't you? She said, I did. I said, well, okay, I just want to let you know that we're on to you. We're on to what's going on. And if we keep rewarding you when you beat yourself up and to try to get you up, instead of you balancing this out yourself, you'll have to go through this cycle, and then you'll end up setting these unrealistic expectations, and you'll be here at 8 o'clock. And then you're going to end up undermining your relationship, as you already are doing. And then you're going to end up beating yourself up there and for really doing it because you're now feeling like you have to compensate. Just know that this is what we expect, and here's the objectives. If you meet those objectives, you're welcome to go home at 6 o'clock. That's when everybody else is going home. So we helped her get objective. We helped her realize where her core competence was. We also helped her realize that this is a compensation, and she centered herself, and it wasn't as extreme. She still did it periodically, but not as extreme, because now she was aware of what she was doing. So there's a strategy in these imposters. Now, I've done this myself. I was speaking at a conference in Dallas, Texas, and there was about 4,000 people there. And I was anxious to speak because I was a young guy. I was 28 years old. And most of these docs have been out in practice for many years. And I was up on the stage, and I was the key speaker, right? Because I had a very fast-growing practice. And I went from about a 900 square foot office to 5,000 square foot office in 18 months and had all these people working for me and stuff. And they wanted to know how I did it. And so in the process of doing it, I watched myself really humble myself and kind of put myself down to prevent me from getting slammed, because I was actually fearing, my real fear was fearing rejection. And so I was kind of humble up there when I did it, and they're all encouraging me. And I found it as a strategy. And so anytime we puff ourselves up, we're going to attract the criticism to get us back in equilibrium. Anytime we minimize ourselves, we're going to attract the support to get us back up. But we can get caught in the addiction of both of those polarities, in hidden unconscious aggrandizement with a conscious display of this minimization to make sure we don't get wounds. I've done it in my business, I've done it in speaking, and I've watched other people do it in my presence and in my seminars. And I've also seen the other extreme. I'm sure you've seen it, where people are puffing up and they're just getting attacks. I think there's somebody in America that's doing that right now that people might recognize. They're puffing themselves up and getting a lot of attacks. and so in the process of doing it, they're just constantly being attacked. But some people, that's actually a compensated on the other extreme. Deep inside, there's a fear of not being ahead, getting ahead. So somewhere there's an unconscious part of them that's actually feeling like if I'm not good enough, I got to be able to put on that facade that I can handle it. Because at one point in my life, I felt like I couldn't. And so this is a compensation to the other extreme. Yes. Both of these are reality for all of us. We have moments when we play the aggrandizement and puff up and minimization process. And they're mechanisms as strategies to get ourselves authentic eventually.
Yeah, that's great. And I think also for many of our listeners, we invest so much into our business. Predominantly our businesses are online these days. You know, what people see and what they see on social media becomes our business and our branding, so to speak. And often we are putting our best foot forward on social media. So do you think that this is why this is so prevalent? Because we're so used to painting a particular picture, like allowing our viewers and our listeners and our followers to see a particular side of us. And then is that what's going on? Is that why we're beating ourselves up in private? Because we're so focused on puffing ourselves up in public.
That's it. You just nailed it.
Yeah.
The addiction to pride brings our shame. The addiction to the hero brings our villain. The addiction to the saint brings our sinner. If you look very carefully, there's always two sides. And it's unwise to display that. But you see, if you're marketing, and I'll use this analogy. I always say that, as the Buddha says, the desire. If we go out there and we try to put on a facade of one side, we automatically going to get slammed by the other side eventually. So the Buddha says we're going to teach the illusion until we're ready for truth. We're going to present the illusion until we're ready for the truth. And I'd rather just put both sides out there. You see me in my seminars, and I'm both hero and villain all day long.
Yes, you are.
And I because I found that if I put on a facade of being, all knowing or all aware or this and that, then I set myself up and trap myself into the illusion, and then I get slammed. So I go, this is unproductive for me and for the people in the seminar. Rather just be me. I'd rather just be able to say, hey, here, I'm a hero and a villain. I'm kind, I'm cruel, I'm nice, I'm mean. I went through the Oxford Dictionary. And I went through 4,628 traits. I circled each of those potential human behavioral traits in the dictionary as a neurotic guy, a researcher. And then I went out to the far ends on that paper and looked at who do I know that display those traits the most extreme. And then I identified inside myself where and when do I display those traits. And I found I had every trait. So if somebody says you're a mean person, I said, at times I am. You're deceitful. At times I am. You're loud and screaming and you're violent at times. Yes, I am. And I finally realized that I don't need to get rid of any part of myself to love myself. I have a place for all those parts. And to try to put on a facade of one side will trap you, because you then will have to face the other, because it's called repression. And anytime you repress half of yourself and try to put on one side, you'll attract events to explode that side you're trying to repress. So it's better to have a little bit every day of both of those and allow yourself to like both sides of yourself than to repress it and then get exposed as the villain. because you've been addicted to your hero.
Yeah, that's great. So for somebody that's just starting out and perhaps is listening to you speak today for the first time, what are some of those early signs? Like what are those ways that our listeners can recognise if they are in fact puffing themselves up and getting ready to attract being slammed, or on the flip side that they're really beating themselves up and that this isn't reality? What can people do?
Well, the wisest thing to do is get objective. Don't pay attention to the personas that people display. Get the facts. Get the objectives. Because if you go by those emotions, they're just manipulative. But if you go in there and actually get into the facts, Mrs. Jones, although you are saying that you think that you were lucky and that you thought that this was just a timing and you thought that somehow you don't feel like you really deserve it and everything else, the facts are you're hardworking, you're getting this job done, and this is what's happening. So I'm not going to pay attention to your persona. I'm going to pay attention to what you're doing, and I'm going to tell you that you're doing a fair job or a great job or not so great job. I'll go by the facts. Get the metrics. The metrics give you feedback. I'm a firm believer in keeping metrics on my goals because that way I find out whether I'm committed to them or not. And if I'm really making progress, it'll show it. And if I'm not, it'll show it. So get the metrics, get objective, get them to live by their priorities. They're less likely to go into these swings and these strategies if they're making sure they're engaged. Engaged people are less likely to have these imposter behaviors. They're less needed because they're doing it. That's why engagement in corporations is so important for productivity. If a person can't see how what they're doing on a daily basis is fulfilling what they value most, they're not going to be inspired, engaged, and productive. Because nobody goes to work for the sake of a company. They go to work for the sake of fulfilling what they value most. If they can see how what they're doing in their job description and in the vision and mission of the company is helping them fulfill that, they'll be engaged. They'll live by their highest values. They're less likely to have imposter syndrome. They become more objective. They like metric feedbacks, and they're not necessarily playing the games and strategies of trying to manipulate others in order to get what they want to protect themselves from their previous ones.
John, that's fantastic. And I think that's really valuable information. It allows us to see where we can use the imposter syndrome to our greatest benefit and yet not buy into it on a daily basis. So Dr. John Demartini, thank you so much for being with us here today on The Conscious Creator. And thank you, listeners, for tuning in and for all of your questions. And we look forward to seeing you next week on The Conscious Creator with Donna Preedy.